So today we have Senior and Vice President of Student Government, Lars Maechling, with us to moderate a special conversation here. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Lars. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Now, for the first question of our conversation, Representative Stafstrom, when you were a high school student, did you think that your path would lead you to a career in politics? And if so, how did you see that materialize?
Sure, so short answer is yes. I think when I was in the 8th grade, I got a very serious case of meningitis. Was in the hospital for a while, was knocked out on bed rest for most of the fall semester, 8th grade. And while I couldn't wait to get back out onto the football field, I think really all I could do was sit there and watch TV. And at the time, it was 1996. It was Bill Clinton was up for re-election against Bob Dole. And I was sort of glued to the TV watching the coverage and the like. And you know, I particularly kind of had this admiration for Madeleine Albright, and I sort of thought, gee, I could really see myself doing something in government, work for the State Department. Probably didn't see myself running for elected office at that point in time, but certainly sort of planted those seeds of I'd like to work in government someday.
Thank you, Representative. Now, Senator Hwang.
Actually, no. I wanted to be the third baseman for the New York Yankees, but that didn't happen. And really, I think for me, high school was an opportunity to look at what my future would look like, either to go to college, pursue a vocation, or to be able to kind of plot out my future. And it was all so very challenging with what kind of direction we could go. So politics, furthest thing from my mind in high school. But I think politics entered into my peripheral when I had a family, when our kids went to school, and there was an impact issue in our community that affected our family, our children, redistricting. And I realized that civic engagement, being involved in political decision-making, I think someone mentioned a paraphrase that in politics, if you're not in the kitchen, you're going to be on the menu being served. So politics was an after effect of being involved in the community and seeing that a voice was necessary to have viewpoints and issues that we felt important addressed.
Thank you, Senator. Now, Fairfield Prep works to form students that are committed to doing justice. How can young people advocate for social justice within their communities and the broader state in a way that makes their voices heard?
Well, I think part of the opportunity experience is learned and exchange and experience. I've had the opportunity to interview many of the Senior Scholarship Award applicants. And one of the first things that I see for Fairfield Prep is the freshman community service requirement. And as I interview many of the students, their first thing is to say, you know, my freshman year, the idea of community service as being a coursework is probably not the top of my list. But what they've shared with me is the fact that as they continue on that community service responsibility, they have found that through service, through giving back, they get more in return. And one of the interesting surveys that came out from Boston College was the fact that young people who understand and have experienced the idea of service for others, that charitable philanthropy does matter, not only from a standpoint of action, but also in feeding the principle of doing for others. They have found that those individuals that start young continue that kind of philanthropy and that value principle throughout their adult lives. And I think when you talk about social justice, social engagement, it really does begin with a person looking in and saying, I'm grateful for what I have. How can I give to help those less fortunate?
Thank you, Senator. Now, Representative Stafstrom.
So I love this question, and I particularly like it in that it asks about justice, which can be distinct from service. And I think Senator Hwang is correct that when he talks about it starts with looking in. When I was a junior here at Fairfield U, I had the opportunity to go on a service trip to Durán, Ecuador, which is one of the poorest cities in the world. There's 100,000 people who live in the city dump. And it is just a really, really tough place. And we were there for a week. We were working in a sort of an orphanage, I guess, run by a Catholic nun who also did some outreach in the community and ran a soup kitchen and the like. And I think towards the middle of that week, a bunch of us who were down there said, this is it, we're dropping out of school, we need to do something, we're gonna come down here and help full time, you need more help. And she pulled us aside one night and she said, stop, you're not dropping out of school, you're gonna get back on the plane, you're gonna go back to Fairfield. She said, but what I want you to take back with you is this. The fact that you are a college student at a top university like Fairfield, living in a place like you do in Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, just based on your education, just based on that opportunity that you have where you are, that puts you in the top 10th of 1% of the world's population. And that's something that you need to remember. That, we can all look around or we can all say somebody else has got this or somebody else has got that, but by going to a school like Prep or Fairfield U, it puts you in that top 10th of 1% of the world's population. And you have that opportunity. And frankly, what she said to us is, frankly, you have that obligation to do justice, to use that tools, use those gifts to better something in society. You might not be able to change the world. You might not help 100,000 people in a dump in Durán, Ecuador, but you might be able to help on your town council, or you might be able to help on the Parks and Rec Board, or you might be able to do something to make your community that much better through your education and through the opportunities you've been given.
Thank you, Representative Stafstrom. Now, considering the yearly theme at Prep this year, Our Common Home, and the emphasis that we place on civil discourse, how do you think an environment better suited for civil discourse between people who disagree with each other can be achieved? And do you think that there are things that you can do in the state legislature to achieve this?
Yeah, so show of hands, who watched the debate last night? All right, well, more of you did. Yes. Good, maybe it's, the morning session was half and half, but I guess this is the older group. I guess, how many of you are planning on voting in November? Ooh. All right, not as many as I thought. Not as many as watched the debate. So maybe that's age, but hopefully more of you will. I guess I'm really struggling this morning. I turned on the news this morning and I kept hearing folks talk about, the tone, it was civil, and they didn't spend an hour and a half screaming at each other, and, isn't that great? Well, yeah, it is. But shouldn't that be expected? Right? Like, where did we get to the point where, we can't have a civilized debate? I mean, there were very clear policy differences between the two people on that stage last night, right? There wasn't a whole heck of a lot that they agreed on if you actually dig down on the policy. But they did it in a respectful manner. And I guess I'm a little discouraged that, all the talk today seems to be, wasn't that great? Wasn't that refreshing? That's how it always should be. We talk about the legislature in Connecticut, and I bet if you actually looked at this last legislative session, there's about 200 bills that passed. And if you looked at my voting record as a Democrat in the House and Senator Hwang's voting record as a Republican in the Senate, I would bet 9 out of 10 times we voted the same way on those bills that became law. How many of you would have thought I would have said that? Probably very few, right? Because the media seems to focus just on those points of disagreement. But at least in Connecticut, at least in the legislature, most of the bills come through with broad bipartisan support, if not unanimous support, because folks do compromise. And it should be respectful, and there should be debate, and there can be policy differences. But when we resort to name calling, when we resort to, outright lies, when we resort to screaming at each other all the time, it's not healthy for democracy, and it's not the way we should be governed.
Thank you, Representative Stafstrom. Now, Senator Hwang.
Civil discourse, as Representative Stafstrom said, the bar is pretty darn low in this day and age. And I think that is a large part due to many factors. And I think one of which is the fact that negative sells. Negative and conflict sells. I think our media has taken the angle of creating these kind of discourse and ignoring collaboration and the 99% of the vote. Look, I'm fully in support of the Transfer Act, which has been you've been a tremendous leader in that. But I think that the challenge is it takes two to engage. When you get hit with bad news or you get hit with an insult, it takes a lot to not reply. And I think the media is unfortunately with technology and the siloing of our news, and I know one of the questions is going to be about how we gather news. I think they all have a tremendous factor in how the civil discourse has moved so far from collaboration and consultation to you're wrong, I'm right, and none of the twain shall pass. But I think really it's not healthy. It is not a healthy tonic for our society, not only in politics, but social interactions and the mental health and well-being of many of us. Not to mention young people like yourselves who are going such challenging times. And I think we've repeated over and over again to the 9th and 10th grade. Here's the bottom line. I can't imagine being a high schooler in 2024 with the unreasonable expectations that's being proliferated by social media and imagery and expectations and the constant conflict that creates such emotional turmoil for many people. So again, kudos to all of you, and it's a great opportunity for us to be able to see you on the audience and not have to through a Zoom.
Thank you, Senator. Now, understanding that being high schoolers in the age of digital media and social media and popular news, this question is very simple but also very crucial. Where do you get your news? And if so, do you recognize bias in the source? And do you make an effort to find news from multiple sources?
I do, and I give lectures at the various colleges, and when I get college students, I ask them, where do you get your news? And most of them get it from either TikTok, through social media, or siloed feeds. And the challenge is technology. Now you understand, I grew up in a society that did not have cell phones, that we actually had to pick up the phone and call someone or meet someone. I think the technology has created and bridging such distance gaps and created such convenience for all of us, but it is also quite dangerous. What I mean by that is data is being collected about your behavior patterns. They're called data and algorithms. So if you find something you like about the New York Yankees, you pop on it, all of a sudden you're gonna get feeds about the Yankees, never the Mets or the Red Sox. So that is one of the considerations that we looked at as legislative bill is data privacy, algorithms, and the devastating impact of bullying and siloing that occurs. So for many of the current people, you get your news from that source and that source only. For me, I look at different sources, and one of the lecture points that I made is for anybody, take an issue, take any issue, watch MSNBC, watch CNN, and then watch Fox News. You will get 3 very different perspectives. And then I offer to you, go watch the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and go watch Al Jazeera's interpretation of that news. It's different, and there is bias because we're human. But ultimately, for both of us as representatives, we have people that we work for and represent. I like to see that we get most of our feedback and news from the people that we represent.
Thank you, Senator. Representative?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're all guilty of sort of the doom scrolling, right? I mean, I'm not immune to it, whether it be TikTok or, well, I'm not on TikTok, but whether, I'm old, so Facebook still, or Really old, Facebook. And I think some of that is, frankly, I would love to be able to cut all the social media off, but I think as elected representatives, we do sort of scroll it because we see what our constituents are talking about and the like. But my primary sources of news are, I'm in the car a lot, so I listen to a lot of NPR radio. And what I like about NPR is you don't just get the NPR stuff, but they do interject stories from the BBC and from Japan Worldview and the like. I read a lot of local newspapers still. I read the Connecticut Post every morning. I check the headlines in the Hartford Courant. But the one thing I don't do is I don't watch cable news at all. MSNBC, CNN, Fox, I don't care. I don't watch any of it. It's not news, it's entertainment, and I think it needs to be seen for what it is.
Thank you, Representative Stafstrom. Now, considering this question about the crucial nature of news and social media in today's democracy, what do you think is the place of phones in school, and should they be in the classroom? And if so, how should they be used as educational tools?
Yeah, so good question. So my kids are a little younger. My oldest is in 7th grade down the road at St. Thomas. And they collect the phones when you walk into school. And, I think particularly at that age, I think they should. I think, maybe you could have a debate at the high school level, but I tend to think collect them, take them away, and maybe on a break period or maybe at lunch or something like that if you want to check in. But in the classroom setting, I tend to think there really isn't a place for phones.
Thank you, Representative Stafstrom. Now, Senator Hwang.
I think it's an issue that we're currently debating that's kind of proliferating. And it is that kind of continuation where digital technology has just kind of dominated our lives. I remember I was at Newtown High School yesterday, and I had two classes of government, and I said to each and every one of them, could you do without your phone for a week? You would have thought that I took their best friend. It was a mortified look of what life would have been like. But again, it's become an indispensable part. But does it distract? Does it create an alternative revenue and an alternative universe? Absolutely. And as I said before, one of the biggest considerations we have is artificial intelligence and the incredible sophistication and the data collection of how you think and behave and reinforcing that pattern. One of the other things I thought about it, remembering back in high school, we have cliques in high school. I'm sure they still exist. But one of the hardest things now is that clique is reinforced not only within your peer group, but in everything else you hear and see. So one of the challenges when we talk about civil discourse and having the deliberation of contrasting viewpoints, you're not going to get that because it's not always the right thing to do among your friends to think outside the box and interact with people outside. The powerful forces of social enforcement is real. And I think that's an incredible challenge that we have to overcome. But technology, make no mistake about it, it has made great advances in our lives, but nevertheless, it has also taken away a lot of the necessary social interaction that are essential to developing relationships.
Thank you, Senator Hwang. Now, in an education system whose students increasingly suffer from mental health issues, what action should be taken to help ensure the well-being of students in this new day and age of social media and digital technology?
You know, when I was asked to speak today, I jumped at the opportunity because, as I said before, I cannot imagine how challenging and how daunting it is to be a high school teenager. From what you wear and how you present and the unreasonable expectations that is formed outside of the world that you live in. And then as you achieve, you're measuring up against the challenges beyond what you think you're capable of. And failure, it's the hardest thing to understand. Failure is an essential part of growing up. It's an essential part of living. You need to learn from your failures, but we have placed such high expectations, such challenges, that we put undue burden on our young people. And it's important to understand that mental health and well-being impacts all of us. And that when you feel that you're down and that you are weary, please, please know that there are people around you that care and love you, and that there are resources to speak to someone. You do not live in a silo reinforced by imagery and expectations that are not real. You are at the onset of an incredible career in life. Enjoy it, take the wins and the losses, and chalk it up as life and experience, and know that you have a full life ahead of you. And truly, truly remember that regardless of how difficult things are, there are people in this world that care deeply for you and love you.
Thank you, Senator Hwang. Now, Representative Stafstrom.
High school's hard. Try being in the state legislature. Right? No, I'm just kidding. Look, I think, as I said in the earlier session, I don't think we can imagine. I think high school is certainly a lot harder than it was 25 years ago when I was in high school. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the pressure, I think the expectations, I think social media, et cetera. Layer on top of that a pandemic, layer on top of that a shortage of mental health providers, layer on top of that a number of teachers who have retired early coming out of the pandemic, really experienced folks who have left the profession. It is a multifaceted challenge, and I think to a degree some of it is funding and resources, but to a degree some of it, like Senator said, is having that recognition. And I think we hear it all the time from folks. Kids these days. No, that's a crock. There are real and different challenges, and also sort of just the outside challenges. I mean, I think we're all facing it, right? I mean, you look at yesterday in the news, conflict in the Middle East, folks losing their homes throughout the Carolinas, a rancorous political campaign and debate yesterday. I mean, we are just bombarded with these outside pressures sort of on top of everything going on in our own lives that is, I think, a struggle for everybody right now.
Thank you, Representative. Now, I know in the previous session you mentioned some environmental issues impacting communities in Bridgeport. What actions do you believe should be taken to further protect our environment, and what can we as students do to protect our environment as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fundamental issue, and unfortunately, for those of you who watched the debate last night, it got not nearly enough attention. I mean, it should have been 45 minutes of the debate yesterday instead of 45 seconds or whatever was devoted to it. I mean, my father lives in Western North Carolina, and got hit with 20 inches of rain the other day, and I went a good 3 days without knowing, frankly, whether he was alive or dead this week because of the storms, and looking at some of the social media feed coming out of places like Asheville and Lake Lure, and which he lives right in between the two. So, I think it is an existential crisis. We keep talking about 1,000-year storms, and we want to just continue to kick the can down the road and not do enough about it. I mean, I think a real missed opportunity last legislative session in Hartford was the House Democratic Caucus actually put out a very robust environmental justice bill, and bill that really would have looked at what we as a state can be doing to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions. And it was one of those probably 5 to 10% of issues that folks just couldn't agree on. And it was a short legislative session, and this excuse and that excuse and whatever. It got left behind as we broke session in May, and there was no significant action on it. And so another year goes by without even we as a state doing anything about it, let alone the federal government. And it's past high time that we take it seriously.
Thank you, Representative. Now, Senator Hwang.
Well, first, Representative Stafstrom, I'm hoping that your dad is okay. I
He's
didn't
good
know.
now. Yeah, thanks.
And climate change is real. We live in a coastal community in which rising sea level can create economic, social, as well as just tremendous impact. But it's not just our coastline, it's our riverways. We saw with the rapid storm just nearly short of a month ago in Oxford and Southbury and Newtown, where rivers overflowed. When you think about it, that the average rainfall in August for those towns is 3.2 inches. That we had literally 12 to 16 inches of rain fall within a 3-hour period. That is what they call a 1,000-year storm. But the 1,000-year storm may be a news feature, but the aftermaths of people's lives are what's critical, because they're forced to pick up the pieces. And so climate change is absolutely essential. And for me, it exists for suburbs, rural, and urban communities, because it has significant consequences across the board. And we do need to take incremental steps. The real challenge is, how do we balance it with some of the cost that takes to make it a economically feasible tipping point to adopt it. You got solar, you got hydro, you've got nuclear, you've got wind. Those are all renewable energies that exist, but we don't have it right now. And in order to adopt it, it costs a lot of money and economic sacrifices that need to occur. So it's a challenge, but I'm all understanding that climate change is an incredible existential force that's going to impact all of us right now at our age, but also for future generations. I think for us as legislators, we have an important responsibility to leave our earth and our environment in a far better setting than when we inherited for all of you.
One of the things I hope that we don't become is desensitized to it. And I fear, back to this story, back to this piece about the media and where you get your news from. I mean, Senator Hwang brought up a point about sort of Oxford and the flooding up there a month ago, and that was a big news story for about a day and a half. Then people moved on to the next thing. And, the flooding down in North Carolina this last week or two, that was a big story for a day and a half. Then people moved on to the next thing. And it's almost that because these storms are becoming more and more frequent and more severe, that we're becoming sort of desensitized to it. Not that differently than how we've become desensitized to school shootings, frankly. And I think between the two, I think it's incumbent upon, frankly, your generation to continue to beat the drum on both of those, so that the rest of us don't become desensitized to what I think are the two most critical issues facing your generation.
And I'll add to that from the standpoint, the national politics, I don't know what they're thinking, but for me, on both of those issues, I have the incredible honor, privilege, and an important responsibility as a state senator to represent Newtown and Sandy Hook. It is important for us to recognize violence in any form, but gun violence is an essential part of that solution. And we need to do better to raise awareness, to take the protocols necessary. I'm happy to say that in a bipartisan basis, on a state level, that we are able, through the great work of Representative Stafstrom and many others, that we are able to have one of the top 2 safest gun laws in the state of, in this country. But nevertheless, I think we still need to work on how people perceive that process of ensuring safety. One of the things I'm very proud of was, with the incredible help of the Attorney General and Representative Stafstrom years past, was we passed a law that made threatening schools, churches, synagogues, and nursery schools to be, instead of a Class A misdemeanor, to be a Class D felony, because of the trauma, because of the impact it affects for all of you as students, and to the parents that bring you or ensure that you come home safely, but also to all of our teachers and administrators that work in that setting. To me, schools, churches, nursery schools, they're a sanctuary of safety and security, we must do everything we can to ensure protection of that. And I
Thanks.
wanted to compliment Representative Stafstrom for being a national leader on that area.
Thank you, Senator Hwang, and thank you, Representative Stafstrom. On that note, I would like to thank you both for coming to Fairfield Prep today. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate it.